As the title says, in this study, we introduced a participatory methodology for analyzing different policy options. So we know that policymaking for socio-ecological systems in general that are facing environmental changes like climate change, natural disasters is a complex task. Usually there are very different natural and social factors involved. They interact with each other. They are constantly changing over time. But then, like the traditional policy analysis methods, usually rely a lot on the cost-benefit analysis and quantitative risk assessment analysis. Like, for example, assessing and quantifying the level of hazards, the level of exposure, and the level of socio-ecological vulnerabilities. While these are all, of course, very important aspects, but usually such methods neglect the role of human behavior, like people perceptions, people preferences, decision-making in the process of policy option analysis. On the other hand, we have this participatory methods that have been recently used a lot and are getting more and more attention, which try to integrate human behavior into the process of policy option analysis. So the objective of our study was to develop and demonstrate a participatory policy analysis methodology to support policymaking for water scarcity. And we've done that by using a combination of agent-based model and fuzzy cognitive map, which is a kind of mental model or mind mapping method as described in the previous presentation. So we used fuzzy cognitive maps to collect and represent human decision-making process, and also identify the impact of human decision on environmental parameters. And then we transfer the output of fuzzy cognitive map into behavioral and environmental rules for agent-based model. And finally, we developed an agent-based model that combines the qualitative and quantitative evidence for policy option analysis. Just a brief introduction. Fuzzy cognitive map, as I said, is a combination of mind mapping method and fuzzy logics. It's usually used in a participatory approach in which the knowledge of different stakeholders are collected and represented using a kind of graph theory, as you can see here. And then we have agent-based model, which is usually used for modeling decisions and actions of stakeholders and simulating the impact of those micro-level decisions and actions in the macro-level behavior of the system. So we use this methodology for supporting policymaking in the case of water scarcity in Rafsanjan township in Iran. This region is very famous for its pistachio production. It's among the top producer of pistachio in Iran and even in the world. 99% of the farms in this region are pistachio farms, and 88% of the population income in this region is from pistachio production. So it's a very important like industry, but unfortunately during the last decades it's being threatened by the water scarcity. So we used fuzzy cognitive map to actually understand the adaptive actions of farmers, how they are adapting themselves to water scarcity. In 5 general questions, we asked them and tried to collect their information about what they have experienced as the causes and impacts of water scarcity in their farms or in their region, what have been their adaptive actions, what they usually do when they face water scarcity, what are the conditions for those actions, and what have been the impact of those actions on their farms and environmental parameters, for example, on their groundwater use, on their economic situation, etc. So for each individual interview, we collected a map. This is like a simple version of the map that we collected, in which we have 3 types of the nodes: the actions, the conditions for those actions, the conditions that needs to be satisfied to make these actions available, and the impact of these actions. So the impacts can also sometimes be condition for a new action. And then we had 60. We interviewed 60 farmers, including small, medium, and large farmers. And we also aggregated these maps, combined all these maps into 3 groups of the small, medium, and large farmers, because we realized that there is a significant difference between the actions that large farmers, medium farmers, and the small farmers take. So we aggregated these 60 maps into 3 groups of maps. And then in the third step, we combine the qualitative and quantitative data, which means that so far all these connections are based on the perception and experience of the farmers. However, there are some connections for which we have quantitative empirical data. For example, we have information about the relation between precipitation and groundwater use, or the impact of groundwater use on pistachio production in this region. So for these connections, we use the quantitative data that we already had. In this step, we have a map which has a combination of qualitative and quantitative evidence. So this is, for example, an aggregated map of the large farmers, which we can see, in which you can see the different actions that are taken by the group of large farmers. For example, they start to buy small farms, they install desalination because the quality of water is not really good. When the water level goes down, the quality of water gets poor. So they install desalination, they start to buy water from the other farmers, they start to dip their wells, and so on. For each of these actions, there are a set of conditions, and there are a set of impacts on their pistachio production, water quality, groundwater use, etc., based on the perception and experiences of farmers on their farms. And we have the same map for the medium farmers and the small farmers. We developed a condition action impact diagram here, CAI, for each fuzzy cognitive map that we had, in which the size or the priority of the actions are based on the frequency that those actions have been chosen by individual farmers. And we have a set of condition and action. And from this, we developed a unified modeling language. For example, it explains that in each UML, or Unified Modeling Language, if farmer observe a lack of groundwater access, they check the condition for each action and implement the first action that all the conditions are satisfied. Otherwise, they go to the next action. And this process goes on. And we also, for our ABM, to add the spatial dimension, we divided the entire region into 7 different regions, in which and each region has its own specific environmental attributes. For example, each one of them has its own groundwater level, water quality, land subsidence, well depth, and allowed well depth, which are different from the other regions. And then we distributed small, medium, and large farmers across these 7 different regions. So in our agent-based model, the agents are farmers and the environments are farm cells with a specific environmental attributes. This is a stylized representation of these 7 regions in our agent-based model. And here you can see a run of the model. So within each time step, 2 things happen. First, the cells get updated based on the empirical data and also based on the impact of action from the previous step. And then in each step, farmers check their water access. If they are not satisfied with their water access, they enter the decision-making process that I already explained in the UML. So that's how we can see the aggregated impact of these behavior, decisions, and actions of farmers on the entire groundwater use and the entire groundwater use of the whole region and for each specific region, sub-region. For validation, we use the historical groundwater use data from 2004 to 2011 and compared it with the result of model for the same period of time. I understand that this is not the best way to validate the model, but that's all the data that we could get, like the historical data that we could get to validate our model. And probably like more qualitative validation also are also required for the like a robust validation of this model. But our results show that our simulation model explains around 81% of validation in historical variation in historical data. We also use this model to compare the impact of different policy options. I'm not going into the detail of these policy options, but just briefly to say that we introduced new policies into the model by implementing the changes that those policies may bring in the farmers' actions and their condition of actions. For example, if a policy may remove some of the actions or change the condition of some of the actions. That's how we impose the policy in the new policies. And we compared the impact of those policies on the overall groundwater use of each region across the 7 regions. This is actually important to note that we use this model to compare the impact of different policies. It's not really for predicting the accurate groundwater use over the next 10 years or 20 years. It's more like comparing, like given that we know the behavior of the farmers, their decision-making process, and the changes that these policies may create in their behavior, what would be the impact of these policies, if we compare those policies with the business as usual and with each other. Like any other model, there are some limitations with our model as well. We don't, for example, we don't take account of the farmers' learning and prediction, how they interact with each other and how that may impact their decision making, for example. The other thing is that standard fuzzy cognitive maps usually don't show the non-linear relationship between the nodes. So for example, we don't really see in this model the non-linear relation between the actions and the environmental variables. However, there are some FCM extensions, such as rule-based fuzzy cognitive map, that are taking account, introducing ways to take account of the non-linear relation between variables that can be used in future studies. And also, we use an average of when we were aggregating the maps, we used the mean of the weights. But another approach would be to use the standard deviation or interval of the weights that we got from different stakeholders, from different individual fuzzy cognitive maps. And at the end, this method is useful for comparing impact of different policies rather than predicting the accurate impact of each policy, as I said. Nevertheless, our approach does contribute in filling the gap in integrated use of qualitative and quantitative data for policy option analysis. We also managed to model the micro-level behavior of the stakeholders and macro-level behavior of the socio-ecological system, where we used fuzzy cognitive map to find the relation between these variables. And at the end, this is a good approach to that cover the main feature of a socio-ecological system, because it can capture the causality and feedback loop by using the fuzzy cognitive map, and it can also represent the temporal dynamics and social spatial heterogeneity by using agent-based model, which is not, which cannot be modeled by fuzzy cognitive map alone. And thank you very much for your attention. And this is actually the publication that you can use for more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sara, for a very good presentation. I see that probably one of our presenters will drop out, so we have a bit more time for questions, which is good. In a way, I have one question here from Thais, who asks you, how do you measure to which grade the conditions or policies affect local citizens?
Can I read the question?
Yes, for sure, but it's privately.
Oh, okay, so can you just repeat the question, sorry?
Yes, it says, how do you measure to which grade the conditions or policies affect local citizens?
Yeah, okay, what we measured, yes, what we tried to analyze in our model was actually the impact of these policies on the entire groundwater use first, and second, what I didn't actually present in the I didn't explain in the presentation. The second was about the migration of the farmers, because the last option that all of the farmers gave us, including the small, medium, and large farmers, was that if they don't have any other option to adapt with to water scarcity, the last option is to just leave the region. So for the small and medium farmers, it would be to just switch to a different kind of income or job. For the large farmers, it was mainly to buy, to just sell off their lands, or just leave their lands and buy off land somewhere else. So that, in the long term, or in the worst case scenario, it would result to the migration of the farmers to the other regions with a better water access. So, what we got from our model, because we compared the impact of 3 main policies that I actually didn't explain in detail, you can find it in the paper, but one of the policies was to just involve farmers in the process of decision making in the groundwater management, which was improving farmers' participation to just manage their own groundwater access, like what it used to be much earlier, and that was apparently the most successful one, that would keep most of the people in the region and would slightly keep the groundwater level from a lot of depletion. So that was the result, but of course a lot has to be done to just come to a good conclusion.
Okay, thank you. I've also a question myself. We had no problem setting up the fuzzy cognitive maps with the stakeholders, and they were very comfortable in doing that. But when we had to do some post-processing and calculations with them, it turned out they were very sensitive for methodological choices in the functions that you use in the fuzzy cognitive maps and the iteration way. It was very difficult to interpret results. Do you have similar experiences? And if so, how did you address these?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. It's just easy to develop that, but then interpretation is not really something straightforward. What I'm doing now, because as a postdoc researcher, I'm using fuzzy cognitive map for another project, which is on flood resilience in UK. And I think, I mean, what we can do and what I'm trying to do now is to just keep this communication with the stakeholders even after eliciting, like collecting their maps. When you like combine the maps and when you want to introduce some results, you can always get back to them if, of course, the timeline of the project allows. You can always get back to them and check if this is like the, if they would agree with this. Or I mean, in a workshop setting, you can always share the results and see if that's what they would expect. But I mean, yeah, and even like during drawing the maps, that's something that you can always, when you are drawing the map, you can always check it with the farmers if this is what they are saying, because it's based on the semi-structured interviews. That's at least how I've done it. It was based on a semi-structured interview. Farmers would start to talk about the process, and I would draw their maps, and I would constantly show them their maps and try to make sure that that's what they are trying to tell me. That's how I would say. I don't know if I answered your question.